We're about to begin a brand new love journey. Please comment on where you're watching from so we can see that our Soul Stories family is all around the world. The first winter winds swept through the bare trees along Madison Avenue, carrying with it the scent of cold metal and burnt coffee. Camille Hart, 29, walked briskly in a worn-out coat, a cooling latte in her hand. She had just finished her shift at Midtown Fertility Center, a place where hundreds of couples' hopes rested quietly inside rows of liquid nitrogen tanks. Camille loved her job, not for the pay, but because it reminded her that every new life, whether born from a test tube or from love, was a miracle. But passion didn't pay the bills. After her father's bankruptcy and disappearance, Camille was left to shoulder his bank debts, overdue rent, and unpaid medical bills. A coworker once joked, "If kindness could be converted into dollars, you'd be rich by now." She laughed, but that night, as she stared at her negative bank balance, she cried. The next morning, Camille received a strange email from Vail Biotech, the largest biotechnology corporation in the United States. It invited her to an interview for a private medical position, with no details provided. The message was short, yet carried the tone of an offer that shouldn't be ignored. The candidate will work directly with the chairman of Vail Biotech. Strict confidentiality required. 12-month contract. Compensation 10 times the industry average. Camille reread it several times, half curious, half skeptical. But when you're about to be evicted, curiosity tends to win over reason. That afternoon, she took a train to Montauk, the far edge of Long Island, where the ocean met white cliffs and the sky looked freshly washed. The taxi stopped in front of the Vail Mansion, a sleek structure of glass and white concrete perched above the sea. No sound of people, only the waves crashing below and the wind sweeping across the stone steps. A middle-aged woman in a black suit opened the door. "Mr. Vail is expecting you in his office." Leonard Vail's office was on the second floor, facing the ocean. The afternoon light streamed through the glass, casting a weave of brightness and shadow over the man standing by the window. He was tall, composed, and wearing a white shirt with his hands in his pockets. His deep, steady voice broke the silence. "Miss Hart, thank you for coming." She hesitated for a moment, her heart skipping a beat. Not because he was handsome, but because there was a kind of stillness about him that altered the air around her. "I'm not sure why I was invited," Camille said, trying to sound composed. "I'm just a fertility nurse, not a scientist." "I know," he replied, turning toward her, his eyes gray, like the sea before a storm. "I don't need a scientist. I need someone with a heart." He handed her a folder. The first page read, "Private IVF surrogacy contract." Camille's eyes widened. "You want me to be a surrogate?" "I want a child," he said quietly, "not for inheritance or legacy, but because I want to know what it feels like to see life continue after everything." He paused, his tone softening, almost as if speaking to himself. "5 years ago, I was in a car accident. She, my wife, didn't make it. I survived, but the doctor said I might never conceive naturally again. Before the surgery, they advised me to preserve my sperm, just in case." He gave a thin, bitter smile. "It's been stored at Vail Cryobank ever since, like a frozen piece of memory." Camille stayed silent. In the dimming light, his face revealed the exhaustion of a man who had long stopped believing in anything. "Why me?" she finally asked. "Because you don't look at me like a patient," he said softly. "I'm not just looking for a mother for my child. I'm looking for someone who can help me believe in life again." A cold breeze slipped through the glass frame, bringing in the salty scent of the sea. Camille shivered, yet oddly her heart felt warm. She looked at the folder, then at him, her guarded gaze softening. "If I agree," she said slowly, "I have one condition." "What is it?" "I won't let this place be filled only with test tubes and silence. I'll cook you the first meal of hope." Leonard raised an eyebrow, surprise flickering before his expression softened. "What kind of meal?" "A real one, with smell, taste, and warmth. Something you've forgotten." He smiled faintly, almost too gently to be called a smile. "The contract hasn't even started, and you're already breaking the first rule." "What rule?" "Don't make me feel anything." By the time Camille left the mansion, dusk had fallen. The sunset stretched across the sea, red as a promise left unspoken. She walked slowly along the stone path, her heart pounding in rhythm with the waves. In her pocket was the freshly signed contract, an agreement between science and the human heart. But somewhere deep inside her, a small voice whispered, "Sometimes what's created in a lab can still begin with love." Montauk greeted Camille with the sound of crashing waves and the damp chill of sea wind. The Vale mansion stood precariously on the cliff's edge, overlooking an ocean so vast it could make a person feel lonely with just a single breath. The house was designed in a minimalist style: glass walls, white oak furniture, no paintings, no flowers. Everything was placed precisely where it belonged, as if inside an architectural model, exact, tidy, and devoid of feeling. Camille walked through the long hallway, the echo of her heels hollow against the marble. A part of her thought quietly, "This isn't a home. It's a museum of loneliness." The housekeeper led her to her room, a small chamber beside the library. White bed, white sheets, white closet. She opened her suitcase and placed a few familiar things on the desk: a jar of lavender honey, a bag of cinnamon tea, and a worn-out recipe notebook. The only trace of Camille in this frozen world. The next morning, when Leonard stepped into the kitchen, he froze. The usual cold scent of plastic and the metallic tang of the coffee machine were gone. In their place lingered the aroma of toasted bread mixed with honey and cinnamon, so gentle it made him stop walking. Camille stood with her back to him, wearing an oversized white shirt, her hair loosely tied, a wooden spoon in her hand as she stirred honey into a cup of tea. The morning light streamed through the glass and fell across her shoulders like a stray beam of sunlight. "This house," Leonard's voice was deep, rough, "has never smelled like this before." She turned, a small smile playing at her lips. "Well, now it does." Leonard sat down, quietly watching her slice bread, drizzle honey, and dust a touch of cinnamon on top. She placed the plate before him, along with a steaming cup of tea. He looked at it, then at her. "You do know I don't eat breakfast?" "Then today's an exception," she replied lightly. "You don't have to eat because you're hungry, just because you're human." He frowned slightly but still picked up the knife and cut a piece. The sweetness and warmth, the hint of cinnamon mingled with the salty air from the sea. He had never thought something as simple as bread could make him feel alive again. "Do you do this for all your patients?" he asked. "No," she said softly. "Only for those who need to be reminded they still have a heart." Leonard didn't answer, but in that moment he felt his heart beat. Once, then again. In the days that followed, Camille transformed the kitchen into the heart of the house. Mornings smelled of freshly ground coffee and cinnamon powder. Afternoons were filled with the sound of chopping vegetables and her quiet humming of old tunes. Evenings glowed with golden firelight and the aroma of red wine simmering in her stews. At first, Leonard kept his distance. He took only a few bites, only nodded when she asked, "Does it taste all right?" But slowly he began staying longer, eating more, and when she smiled, the corner of his lips trembled ever so slightly. She noticed that every time he passed by the kitchen, he paused for a few seconds, not to speak, but simply to breathe in the scent of life. One evening, light rain began to fall. Camille lit the stove to cook pumpkin soup. The firelight flickered on her face, turning her skin the color of honey. Leonard walked in silently, leaning against the doorway, watching her. She didn't notice, still stirring the soup, softly humming a tune. Her voice wasn't that of a singer, but it was warm enough to make the room feel smaller, safer. The light, the scent of cinnamon, and her gentle voice wove together. And for the first time in years, the house seemed to have a soul. Leonard looked at her, and something inside his chest tightened. A faint ache, but strong enough to steal his breath for a second. A memory surfaced of a dinner long ago, his late wife standing by the fire just like this. But the memory faded, leaving only the woman before him, the one who had brought cinnamon, music, and life back into this house. "You all right?" Camille asked, turning to him. "Yes," he said quietly. "I just forgot how beautiful firelight can be." She smiled, lifting the ladle toward him. Try this. I promise it tastes better than it looks. He leaned forward, took a small sip. The mild sweetness of pumpkin, the richness of cream, the savory broth, and the faint trace of wine blended perfectly. He looked up, his gaze softer now. You're right, he said. This house has never smelled like this before. That night, Leonard sat in his office, files open before him, unread. Outside, the sea wind carried traces of cinnamon and pumpkin from the kitchen below. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he fell asleep. Without pills, without whiskey, only with the scent of life. Thursday morning. Montauk greeted them with a thick layer of mist blanketing the coastal road. The black SUV pulled away from the mansion, gliding through empty streets toward the medical center in East Hampton. Camille sat in the back seat, holding a folder of test results. She didn't look out the window. Instead, she looked into the rearview mirror, where Leonard's face appeared faintly reflected. He was driving, his expression so calm it was as if nothing outside that car existed. You didn't have to come with me, she said softly. I know, he replied, eyes fixed ahead. But if it makes you feel better having someone wait in the hallway, I have time. The way he said, I have time, sounded more like, I have nothing more important to do. Camille smiled faintly, clutching the folder tighter, feeling a quiet warmth laced with something tender and sad. The clinic was bright, clean, and still. Camille was used to the smell of antiseptic, yet today it made her oddly tense. While the nurse drew blood and checked hormone levels, Leonard sat in the hallway, phone in hand. Screen dark. He stared out the window at the trees swaying in the wind. A couple walked by, hand in hand, the woman visibly pregnant. His gaze lingered for only a moment, but in that brief silence, something flickered in his eyes. Something both aching and soft, like an old wound touched by wind. When Camille came out, the doctor called them both into the consultation room. On the desk were hormone charts, fertility graphs, and a thick old folder wrapped in silver-gray cover stock. The doctor smiled warmly. Everything is progressing well, Ms. Hart. As for you, Mr. Vale, your frozen sample remains perfectly preserved. I must say, the specimen's quality back then was remarkable, even after 5 years. Camille glanced at Leonard. His face stayed composed, but his jaw tightened slightly. She noticed his fingers tremble on the table before curling quickly into a fist. I understand, he said quietly. Thank you, doctor. On the drive home, neither of them spoke. Soft music played in the car. Claire de Lune, the same piece he often played alone in his office. Camille gazed out toward the sea and asked gently, Have you ever gone back to the cryo center? No, he answered, eyes still fixed on the road. I don't want to look at what's already gone. That sample, it's just a fragment of the man I used to be. Before the accident. He paused, voice lowering, slower now, as if admitting something he'd never told anyone. You know, Camille, when you survive an accident that someone else doesn't, people call it luck. But no one tells you that kind of luck will haunt you for life. Camille stayed silent. She understood. What he wanted wasn't just a child, but a reason to believe he was still human. That night, she decided to cook something special. The kitchen glowed with warmth, the firelight dancing inside the oven. On the stove, a pot of chicken, braised in red wine, simmered gently, rich and fragrant. She turned on the radio, soft old jazz, and set the table with linen, candles, and 2 glasses of wine. When Leonard walked in, he stopped. The scene before him unsettled him. Not because it was elegant, but because it looked alive. What are you doing? He asked. Having dinner, Camille replied, smiling as she turned. You should too. You've swallowed enough silence for one day. He stepped closer to the table, eyes lingering on the 2 wine glasses. You think I need this? No, she said, pouring for him. I think the man inside you does. They sat across from each other, candlelight flickering in the red wine between them. Leonard ate slowly, without speaking. Camille didn't rush either. The only sounds were the quiet clink of cutlery and the aroma that filled the room, a kind of unspoken language between 2 people who had forgotten how to talk about feelings. After a while, he set down his knife and looked at her. I'd forgotten what it feels like to have someone care. She smiled, her eyes glowing in the candlelight. Then let me remind you, 1 meal at a time, Neither of them laughed. Neither spoke again. But between them something flickered. Slow, gentle, real. Not desire, not pity. Something purer. The kind of trembling that only exists between two people carrying old wounds. Leonard looked at her for a long time, as if trying to find a lost piece of memory in her face. The candlelight brushed her features, reflecting in his eyes, softening the hard line between light and shadow. Outside, the waves kept crashing, steady, distant. But inside that house, for the first time in years, silence was no longer empty. The night before the procedure, Montauk was swallowed by heavy rain. The sky turned a solid gray, with wind howling through the glass frames and thunder ripping the heavens apart before crashing into the sea below. Leonard's glass mansion stood like a cold, glowing monolith, adrift in the storm. Camille lay awake in her room, listening to the rain pounding on the roof. She kept turning over, her heart racing. Not from fear, but from what awaited tomorrow. Tomorrow they would begin the sampling, the final step of the process. It should have been a purely medical procedure, detached and clinical. But ever since Leonard had quietly stood beside her at every test, everything felt too real. She sat up, slipped on a thin sweater, and went downstairs. The kitchen light was still on, the warm glow flickering against the walls like small trails of fire. Camille opened the cupboard, took out flour, eggs, and butter, and began making cream puffs, something she always baked when she couldn't sleep. The sound of rain outside blended with the clinking of metal, the air filled with the scent of melting butter and lightly caramelized sugar. Flour dusted her hands and hair, leaving soft white traces everywhere. "Are you planning to challenge the storm itself?" Leonard's voice came from the doorway. She startled, turning around. He stood there, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, hair slightly tousled, eyes a mixture of fatigue and curiosity. "I couldn't sleep," she said softly. "When lightning strikes, I bake." "Weird, isn't it?" "No," he said after a pause. "Just the first time I've seen someone treat baking as a defense against the weather." He stepped into the kitchen, glanced around, then grabbed a towel to help her wipe the flour from the counter. A small gesture, but profoundly human. And then, for the first time, he laughed. A low, rough sound, incomplete, yet enough to warm the entire room. Camille tilted her head, teasing, "You just laughed, didn't you?" "I didn't know I still could." "See? That's the first miracle already." They cleaned the flour together, both quiet, the steady rain their only soundtrack. Camille pulled the tray of pastries from the oven, hot air brushing her face. The flicker of the fire reflected in Leonard's eyes, as if he were seeing his own heart there. She sat down, handed him a cream puff still warm from the oven. "Do you still believe in miracles?" she asked. He looked up, his expression softening, then dimming with quiet sorrow. "I used to, before I lost her." The words dropped between them like a single raindrop on fire. Camille said nothing. She didn't ask who she was, because sometimes you don't need to know to understand the pain. She only whispered gently, "Then let me make a new miracle for you." A second passed, then another. The rain outside grew louder, as if to drown the sound of breathing. Camille stood about to turn away, but Leonard caught her wrist. His fingers were cold, damp, hers warm and dusted with flour. They looked at each other. No words, no logic. He leaned down, his lips brushing hers. At first it was just a touch, trembling, uncertain. But when she didn't pull away, the kiss deepened. Slower, real, unstoppable. She could smell the rain tangled in his hair, the faint trace of wine on his breath, the sweetness of vanilla cream melting between them. He drew her closer, his hand sliding to the back of her neck, gentle yet hungry. Between rain and fire, between reason and instinct, two people who had long feared their feelings finally stopped being afraid. When everything quieted, the kitchen lights still glowed, the fire in the oven fading low. She rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the uneven rhythm of his heartbeat. Outside, the thunder drifted away, leaving only wind, and the sound of two breaths merging into one. Leonard brushed her hair softly, his fingers pausing over a smear of flour on her cheek. He smiled faintly and whispered, "Maybe what I just did was the stupidest and the most beautiful thing ever." Camille didn't answer. She only closed her eyes, smiling quietly, letting the warmth envelop them. And that night, as the storm raged beyond the glass walls inside the cold house, for the first time, their hearts beat in unison. The next morning, Montauk's sky was startlingly clear. Last night's storm had washed everything clean, the salt mist on the windows, and the silence that had lingered inside the house. Soft sunlight streamed through the curtains, falling onto the wooden floor, warm and gentle like a whisper. Camille woke first. She lay still for a moment, listening to the waves crashing against the distant cliffs, the sound of wind sliding through the cracks of the window. Leonard was still asleep, half his body bathed in golden light. On her wrist, faint red marks remained, proof of something that had truly happened, not a dream. A flicker of fear crossed her mind, not because she regretted it, but because she knew. From this moment on, there was no going back to the safety of the contract. She slipped on his shirt and went downstairs. Morning blazed bright. The sea was a deep, endless blue. She brewed coffee, toasted waffles, sliced strawberries, and drizzled honey. The toaster clicked, filling the air with the warm scent of butter. The kitchen was no longer a place of silence. It now had a heartbeat. When Leonard came down, she was standing by the window, sunlight tracing her bare shoulder. He paused in the doorway, leaning against the wooden frame, watching her for a few seconds without saying a word. The way he looked at her was no longer that of a host or a doctor, but of a man, gazing at the woman who had made him lose control just hours ago. "Waffles?" he asked, his voice low. "Waffles," she replied without turning, "with fresh strawberries. I thought after a storm, we could use something sweet." He chuckled softly, stepping closer. "If you keep cooking like that, I might never want anyone else." She froze for a second, then laughed, her cheeks blooming pink. "Are you joking?" "No," he said quietly. "I'm being honest." She looked down, hiding her smile. But behind that smile, both of them understood. They had crossed a line. This was no longer medicine, no longer a plan. It had become something science couldn't define. Life, born from the heart. Breakfast passed in tender silence. Leonard ate more than usual, no longer avoiding her gaze. And Camille, between simple gestures like refilling his coffee and passing him strawberries, felt herself softening, melting into the morning light. After breakfast, he had to make a few business calls. She cleaned up, washed the dishes, then wandered through the hallway toward the library, where a glass door looked down into the private biological storage room beneath the house. The glow from the control panel shimmered faintly, a ghostly blue like a memory preserved in glass. She descended the steps. The room was cold, silent, filled with the quiet hum of cooling machines. On one of the shelves sat a small silver container, engraved with words, "Sample number 001, Vale, Leonard, Frozen Archive." Camille reached out, her fingertips brushing the chilled metal. The cold rushed up her hand, sending a shiver through her. She stood there for a moment, then whispered, not sure if she was speaking to him or to herself. "You think you froze your future, but your future is standing right beside you." She turned back toward the stairs. Sunlight streamed down in narrow beams. And there at the top stood Leonard. She didn't know how long he had been there, or how much he had heard, but his eyes, for once, were not cold. He descended a few steps, stopping beside her. He didn't speak. He simply touched her hand. Not the kind of touch from last night, but one of the morning. Steady, real, gentle. "Are you cold?" he asked softly. "No," she said, eyes still on the silver case. "I think it's warm enough here." That morning outside, Montauk gleamed with sunlight after the storm. Inside the house, they stood close, between the chill of the machines and the warmth of breath, between what they couldn't yet name. Every boundary between them had melted, quietly, naturally, and irreversibly. Soul Stories fam, if you're watching on another channel, come home to us at Soul Stories, where tens of thousands of listeners and sharers come together. 2 weeks later, Leonard had to fly to Zurich for Vale Biotech's International Biomedical Conference. The trip had been scheduled long ago. Only neither of them expected how his absence would make the Montauk house feel so hollow, so loud in its emptiness. Camille stood on the porch as the car pulled away. The sea wind blew hard, catching the edge of his coat in the misty morning air. He turned back once, just for a moment, his gaze quiet, wordless, as if in that single look he had already said everything they hadn't yet dared to say. When the car disappeared behind the pine-lined road, Camille remained standing there, her hand unconsciously brushing the set of keys he'd left behind. The sea still roared, but the house was so silent she could hear the ticking of the clock echo through its walls. In the days that followed, she continued her hormone cycle under the doctor's schedule. Injections, measurements, notes, everything by the book. Only now, every room in the mansion seemed twice as large. In the mornings, she still baked, but the scent of cinnamon no longer traveled far. In the evenings, she still cooked dinner, and still, without realizing it, set an extra plate on the table across from her. The same chair Leonard used to sit in, quietly listening as she talked about small, ordinary things. The weather, the lavender garden, the neighbor's cat that came by for canned fish. That chair was empty, but she still said it. She still poured a glass of wine, still said softly, "Dinner's ready, Mr. Vale," then sat in silence, staring at the untouched glass. In Zurich, Leonard stayed in a glass-walled hotel suite on the 38th floor. Everything was on schedule, precise, perfect, yet he couldn't sleep. On the first night, he turned the TV on, then off, then on again. He tried reading the financial report, then put it down. All he could see in his mind was the golden light of the Montauk kitchen, and her laughter when she realized she'd added too much salt to the soup. On the fourth night, nearly 3 a.m., he picked up his phone. His thumb hovered over her name for a long time. Finally, he pressed call. "Camille, you're supposed to be in Zurich. I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see you in the kitchen." On the other end, she laughed softly, tired but warm. "I'm not even making anything special. Everything you make is special." Across the ocean, there were no more words, only the sound of breathing, the kind of silence that exists only when two people are too close to need words and too far to touch. Before hanging up, he murmured hoarsely, "Stay warm, Camille." "You too, Leonard." The line went dead, but the longing didn't. 2 weeks passed more slowly than winter. Camille kept working, kept smiling at the clinic, but each evening the house swallowed her whole again. At night, she'd stand by the window, watching the distant ship lights glimmer on the water like fallen stars, and wondered if, in Zurich, he was looking at the same sky. The night he returned, Montauk had just stopped raining. She was setting the table when she heard the door open. She didn't need to look. She knew. She turned, and there he was, standing in the doorway, his dark suit damp from the rain. They looked at each other. No words, none needed. He walked toward her, slow, steady, and pulled her into his arms. The first embrace after 2 weeks. Long, tight, real. She could hear his heartbeat, fast and uneven, and all she managed to whisper was, "You're home." He didn't answer. He just kissed her. A kiss that was part comfort, part confession, far too late and far too true. And in that moment, every distance, every promise, every boundary disappeared. There was no Zurich, no contract, no reason left to hide. Only two people had tried to resist feeling and failed. That morning, Montauk lay beneath a veil of silver mist. The sea was unnaturally calm, as if the universe itself knew this day was different. Camille woke early, sitting by the window as seagulls circled above the horizon. On the table sat her folded medical uniform, the appointment slip from Vale Fertility Center, and the silver bracelet Leonard had left on the nightstand the night before. A promise unspoken but felt. She touched the bracelet gently and whispered, "Today, we begin again." The embryo transfer room at Vale Fertility occupied the 12th floor. Pristine white, where every sound seemed amplified. The faint scent of antiseptic, the glow of fluorescent lights, the soft steps of nurses. All of it was familiar to Camille, yet today, none of it felt like work. Today it was her body, her heart. Leonard walked beside her, dressed in a white shirt, his face calm, almost too calm, as if holding something inside. Dr. Meyer, a kind middle-aged woman, looked at both of them and spoke softly. "All your indicators look perfect. The chances of success are high, and this will be the final attempt. We have only one frozen sample left. Silence filled the space. Camille lifted her gaze and met Leonard's eyes. He gave a slight nod, then extended his hand. I want this child to be born from faith, he said, voice low and rough. Not from obligation. Camille squeezed his hand, her smile trembling. Then I promise to believe. They were led into the transfer room, a small, softly lit space filled with the steady rhythm of monitoring machines. Camille lay on the table, her heart racing faster than the beeping of the monitors. Through the frosted glass, she saw the embryologist preparing the last biological sample. The cryopreserved vial labeled, Vale, Leonard, sample number 001. The test tube shimmered under the lab light, like a piece of his frozen past, thawing to become life. Dr. Meyer spoke gently. Let's begin. Breathe in and relax. Camille closed her eyes, and in the moment the tiny embryo was transferred into her womb, Leonard took her hand. His grip was warm, strong, but trembling. Not from fear, but from the knowledge that nothing in his life would ever be the same again. Their eyes met. No smile and no words. Just a silence so deep it carried the sound of two hearts beating in unison. Dr. Meyer left the room, giving them a few minutes alone. Camille lay still, her breathing slowing, steadying. Leonard sat beside her, their fingers still intertwined. He looked up at the monitor, at the tiny glowing dot that appeared on the screen, fragile and bright. It wasn't yet a child, not yet a name, but to him it was already everything. His voice dropped to a whisper, almost a prayer. If there's such a thing as a miracle, it must begin at this very moment. Camille opened her eyes, met his gaze, and nodded softly. I think we just made a vow. He smiled faintly, eyes glistening. A vow that doesn't need words. Outside, the mist began to lift. The first rays of sunlight streamed through the window, falling across their joined hands. And within those hands, new life had just begun. The news broke on a morning so calm, it seemed nothing could disturb it. Camille was pouring tea when her phone buzzed. A colleague had sent her a link. Vale Biotech confirms private IVF project utilizing cryopreserved biological samples from 5 years ago. Just one line. No names, no context. But it was enough. Within hours, social media caught fire. Some claimed it was part of a genetic reproduction study. Others insisted that Leonard Vale, founder of Vale Biotech, was attempting to create an heir in a test tube. Camille set the phone down, her hands trembling slightly. She wasn't afraid of the truth being exposed. She was afraid of what would come with it. Judgment. And deeper still, she feared the people tied to his past. That afternoon, as the wind picked up off the coast, the sound of a car echoed along the Pine Line Road. Camille glanced out the window. A sleek black sedan pulled up. A woman stepped out, slim, poised, her brown hair neat, her eyes sharp yet composed. Classic beauty, elegant, confident, but her gaze carried a precision that could make others feel small. Ms. Hart, the woman said, her voice smooth. Yes, I'm Victoria Hale, Emily's sister. The name hit Camille like a quiet shock. Emily, the woman who had died in the accident 5 years ago. The woman Leonard rarely spoke about, but whose name always darkened his eyes like rain threatening to fall. Victoria entered the house with the kind of ease that came from ownership, or memory. She glanced around, her eyes stopping at the chair by the window, the one where Leonard often sat reading. How strange, she murmured softly. My sister used to love this room full of light. After she passed, Leonard had reflective glass installed, which blocked out the sunlight completely. And now, she turned, smiling faintly. Now it smells of bread and cinnamon. Seems he's found a new kind of warmth. Camille smiled politely, but her chest tightened. I just do what I know how to do. Yes, Victoria said, her tone calm but cutting. You seem to know quite well how to make him forget the cold. She set her purse down on the table, her eyes never leaving Camille's. Not angry, not jealous, but with the chilling assurance of someone who believed she had the moral high ground. He's only replacing my sister with you, Camille. The words weren't loud or cruel, but they sank like water dripping steadily through stone. Victoria's voice softened, almost kind but edged with quiet malice. Leonard's a good man, but he doesn't know how to let go. He'll do anything to fill the void, even with someone who just happens to look kind. Camille froze. She didn't respond. She simply stood there, each word pressing against the tender part of her heart. Before leaving, Victoria lowered her voice, a whisper masquerading as compassion. I didn't come to judge you. I just wanted to remind you, sometimes the dead never truly leave. Then she was gone. The door closed softly behind her. Her perfume lingered, rich, cold, and eerily familiar. The same scent Camille once found in the drawer where Leonard kept Emily's things. That evening, Leonard came home. He hadn't even crossed the threshold before realizing something was different. No smell of baked bread, no music, only darkness. Camille? I'm here, she answered from the kitchen, her voice faint. He looked at her, saw her eyes avoiding his. What happened? Nothing, I just think maybe we should keep some distance. For a while. Why? I don't know. Maybe things have gone too far. He stepped closer, stopping in front of her, his gaze firm but wounded. If you trust what others say more than what you feel, then this contract means nothing. She looked up, lips pressed together. She wanted to say, this hasn't been a contract for a long time. But she was afraid, because if she said it, it would make it real. I don't believe anyone, she whispered. Sometimes I'm scared. Scared that I'm the only one who came after. Leonard's eyes softened, his voice low. Even the one who comes after can still be the one who's chosen. Just don't walk away before I get the chance to keep you. She said nothing. And that night, after he went upstairs, Camille remained alone in the dim light, her reflection flickering in the half-full glass of water. She reached out to the table where Victoria had sat earlier and realized, sometimes it only takes one ghost from the past to make every fragile belief begin to tremble. That night, Montauk was consumed by a storm. Rain had started early, lashing against the glass as if trying to erase the sky itself. From the second-floor balcony, Camille stared down at the wild sea, waves bursting into silver foam, like white fire tearing through the dark. Her heart was in chaos. Victoria's words, Leonard's quiet eyes when she avoided his touch, the silent dinners that stretched too long, all tangled inside her, tightening around her chest until she could barely breathe. She knew she loved him, but that truth terrified her more than anything. She feared this love had been born not from freedom, but from guilt. The wind howled harder. She grabbed her coat and stepped outside. No note, no message, just her figure dissolving into the rain that stretched endlessly toward the sea. When Leonard realized she was gone, the clock was nearing midnight. The door was wide open. Her raincoat was missing. He rushed out, the storm slashing against his face like knives. Camille! He shouted, his voice torn apart by the wind. Camille! No answer, only the crash of waves and thunder rolling in the distance. He sprinted along the shore, shoes sinking into wet sand, his pulse hammering in his ears. Then he saw her, a small figure in a gray coat, standing at the edge of the wooden pier, staring into the raging ocean that seemed ready to devour the world. Are you out of your mind? He yelled, his voice trembling with anger and fear. It's a storm! She didn't turn around. You wouldn't understand. He took a step closer, rain streaming down his face, his voice breaking against the wind. Then make me understand. She turned to him, rain and tears blurring together on her cheeks. I'm scared, Leonard. Scared that everything you do, holding me, looking at me, kissing me, is just guilt. Because she died. Because you need to make it right somehow. Not because of me. Leonard froze. Rain beat against his shoulders, soaking through his shirt, cold to the bone. He shook his head, a strangled laugh escaping him. The kind that hurt more than crying. You think I need a child? He shouted over the storm, his voice echoing across the sea. At first, yes. That's why I hired you. For the baby. But now. He stepped closer, grabbing her hand, his voice breaking apart. Now I need you. You remind me I'm still alive. I can't even remember the last time I was this afraid of losing someone. She looked at him, her tears lost in the downpour. But what if this is just a feeling? What if one day you wake up and realize, I was only a replacement? Leonard tightened his grip, trembling, his words rough but steady. I love you because you made me believe again. Believe in something beyond pain. Guilt doesn't laugh, Camille, but you do. Lightning split the sky, a flash of blue spilling across their faces. Camille broke down, her sobs drowned in the roar of the rain. Leonard pulled her into his arms, holding her as if he'd die if he let go. Then he kissed her, a kiss stripped of reason, of restraint, of every wall they'd built. No science, no contract, no logic, just two souls clinging to the only truth that mattered. Rain flooded the pier, and waves lapped at their feet. Wind tore through her hair, his shirt clung to his skin, drenched, but neither moved. And for one suspended moment, even the ocean went still. No thunder, no doubt, no fear. The only truth was that they loved each other, not out of duty, not out of memory, but because for the first time in their lives, they were truly alive. Morning in Montauk was breathtakingly clear. The sea lay flat as silk, sunlight scattering flecks of gold across the wings of circling gulls. Camille woke earlier than usual, not from insomnia, but from a feeling as thin as mist. Today, something would change. She stood before the mirror, pressing her hand gently to her still flat belly. Her heart was racing so fast it sounded like a faint knocking on a door. Leonard opened the door, leaning against the frame with a drowsy, soft smile that was rare for him. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. They walked down the stairs hand in hand, as if letting go might send them falling out of this fragile reality and back into the quiet place they once lived, where silence had been their only language. Vale Fertility Center was bright, white, and serene. Dr. Meyer greeted them with her usual gentle eyes, but this morning there was a playful sparkle there, as though she already knew the answer they had come to hear. "Ms. Hart," she said kindly, "please lie down. Let's see if someone would like to say hello." Camille took a deep breath and reclined. The cool gel on her skin made her shiver, while Leonard stood at her side, his fingers threaded through hers, squeezing once, sharing calm for both of them. The monitor flickered to life. Blurry white and black shapes pulsed on the screen like snowflakes caught in light. "Here," Dr. Meyer whispered, moving the probe slightly. "Look closely. That little spark right there. Your baby is here." Camille tilted her head, eyes wide. On the screen, a tiny dark hollow appeared. Inside it, a flickering light, smaller than a grain of rice, yet impossibly alive. "Oh," she breathed. Just one word, and suddenly all others became unnecessary. Leonard leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. "Ready?" Dr. Meyer smiled, switching on the sound. The room, once filled only with the hum of machines, burst into rhythm. Thump, 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 thump. A heartbeat, small as a bean, steady as faith. Not music, not rain, not waves. It was the sound of life. Leonard wasn't prepared. His throat tightened, his eyes stung before he realized he was crying. He had taught himself never to cry, not in boardrooms, not at funerals, not when signing away years of his life. But before this sound, every wall collapsed. A tear slipped down onto Camille's hand. "I've heard millions of pieces of music," he said, voice breaking like a string stretched by sea wind. "But nothing sounds as beautiful as this." Camille reached up and wiped the tear from his cheek. "I think so too." She turned back to the screen, memorizing every flicker, every pause between the beats. Some loves need no vows, only a witness in the form of a heartbeat. Dr. Meyer printed the ultrasound image, the warm paper sliding into Camille's hand like a piece of sunset. "Congratulations to you both," she said softly, her voice trembling with the quiet reverence of someone who had seen enough loss to recognize a miracle. "Your body is responding beautifully. From now on, be gentle with yourself and with each other. And eat more, chef." Camille laughed, tears still shining. "I'll cook the whole world if I have to." Outside, Montauk gleamed under a gold sky. The wind carried the scent of salt, fresh like fruit newly peeled. Leonard held the car door open, but she didn't get in right away. She tilted her face upward, a strange feeling rising in her chest. light as drifting, grounded as roots taking hold. "Wait," Leonard said, circling to the trunk. He rummaged for a moment and returned with a small box wrapped in linen. "I was going to wait until tonight," he admitted, looking almost shy. "But maybe now is better." Camille opened the box. Inside was a fine gold chain, its pendant a drop of clear glass holding a single grain of sand, tiny, pale, and ordinary to anyone else. "Montauk sand," Leonard said, brushing a thumb over it. "The only thing that can't be frozen. I used to try to preserve everything. Memories, time, even the future. But sand," he smiled, eyes warm as honey under sunlight. "Sand always slips through your fingers, leaving warmth behind. I wanted to keep one grain, to remind myself that what truly belongs to us doesn't need to be trapped." Camille couldn't help it. She threw her arms around him. "I'll wear it every day," she whispered. "And every time it touches my skin, I'll remember today, the baby's heartbeat, and the way you looked at me like I just saved your world." "You did," he murmured into her hair. The days that followed moved slowly, sweet, full of breath and ordinary miracles. They decided to live together completely, not out of convenience, but out of peace. The kitchen became the heart of their home. In the mornings, Camille brewed cinnamon tea, toasted bread, and drizzled honey. Leonard sliced fruit awkwardly, the knife wobbling as if it were learning to write. "Don't laugh," he warned, but ended up laughing himself when a kiwi slice fell off the plate. At noon, she taught him how to stir-fry without burning the vegetables. "The secret is high heat and courage," she said. He stood behind her, his hand over hers on the pan's handle, feeling the rhythm of her movements, the rhythm of her heart. A drop of oil splashed onto his hand. "Ow!" "Let me," she said, blowing softly on the red mark. He smiled, and for some reason, the sting became a reason to kiss her forehead in thanks. By afternoon, they planted herbs in the backyard. Basil, thyme, mint. Camille joked that their child would grow up surrounded by herbs and sea breeze, and would probably season every memory with a pinch of sunlight. Leonard, hands dirty with soil, watched her kneel and plant each sprig as if lighting candles on an unlit birthday cake. He thought, maybe happiness isn't grand at all. Maybe it's made of small, slow movements, repeated until they form the shape of home. At night, Camille climbed into bed with a thin book of seaside essays, resting her head on his shoulder as she read aloud. Her voice fell like sand through an hourglass, slow, warm, patient. Leonard closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to listen. Sometimes she paused, placing her hand on her belly. "Are you listening, little one?" He leaned closer, pretending to listen seriously. "I can confirm someone in there is smiling." One evening, as the breeze carried the scent of salt into their room, Leonard asked quietly, "Are you still afraid?" Camille shook her head. "Not like before. Fear still exists, because love always carries fear. But the baby's heartbeat makes me brave." She took his hand and placed it on her belly. "And your hand makes me calm." "Same for me," he said, kissing the back of her hand. "I used to think my life's goal was to control uncertainty. But it turns out the most beautiful things happen when I stop trying." Camille smiled, touching the sand pendant at her throat. The grains shimmered gently with her breath, like a star caught on a thread. "The most beautiful thing," she whispered, "are the ones you can't keep." Before turning off the light, they performed their little ritual. Camille pressed the ultrasound photo against the wooden headboard, next to a picture of Montauk's dawn. Leonard laid his hand over it, as if making a promise to a morning yet to come. "Sleep," he whispered. "Tomorrow we'll cook again, plant more mint, read another chapter. And the baby will grow, one grain of sand bigger," Camille smiled. That night, as sleep drew its curtain, the house no longer smelled of steel or antiseptic like it once did. It smelled of cinnamon, earth, paper, and the skin of someone you love. Somewhere within the thousand sounds of night, waves, wind, leaves brushing glass. A tiny heartbeat kept its steady rhythm. Not loud, not proud, but steadfast. A quiet message from a life newly begun. And with every beat, every doubt melted like mist in sunlight. Because when life speaks, the shadows no longer have a reason to stay. Summer returned to Montauk, golden and thick as honey. Along the pine-lined road leading to the villa stood 2 lavender pots Camille had planted last year. Their violet blooms trembled in the sea wind, releasing a scent so gentle it felt like a prayer. On the kitchen windowsill, basil, thyme, and mint crowded together, a small jungle of green. The house was no longer a shelter from memory. It had become a living being. Every morning it inhaled coffee and cinnamon tea. Every evening it exhaled warmth from the oven and the soft murmur of bedtime stories. One year, one year, neither of them ever meant to fall in love. But love never asked for permission. Camille went into labor on a sun-washed autumn morning. The first winds of the new season shifted direction. The sea darkened into deep sapphire. Leonard drove, palms sweating, whispering her breathing rhythm like he could share her pain. Inside the delivery room, he held her hand the entire time, his gaze steady as an anchor. Sometimes she screamed, sometimes she laughed through tears, and he kept breathing, steady, rhythmic, as if diving through cold water again. Only this time, every fear in the world condensed into one. Don't let anything happen to her. When the first cry burst through the air, sharp and pure, time cracked open to let a ribbon of light pour through. The baby was placed on Camille's chest, warm, damp, miraculous. The whole world shrank into that tiny breath. Leonard looked at his daughter, at Camille, then back at his daughter, again and again like a man learning to read, afraid to mispronounce the sacred. "Eden," Camille whispered, her lips trembling. "Hello, sweetheart." Eden opened her eyes. They were sea gray, the color of Montauk at dawn when the fog begins to lift. Leonard smiled, unable to stop the tears. He lifted the baby, pressing his cheek to her silken hair. "I once froze the best part of myself," he said hoarsely, joy and fear mingling. "You made it thaw." Camille touched his face, her fingers brushing the salt of his tears. "Not me," she murmured. "Us," and the sound of her heart. The doctor and nurses quietly left, leaving behind a soft silence. On the monitor, numbers blinked like a wordless song. Leonard placed Eden between them, letting her tiny fingers curl around his own. For the first time, he understood what it meant to be willingly held captive. The days that followed found the house breathing to Eden's rhythm, steady yet full of wonder. In the mornings, Camille carried her onto the porch to listen to the sea. By noon, Leonard fumbled with milk bottles, spilling half on his shirt, earning Camille's laughter and the title CEO of 3 broken bottles. Evenings brought the small white tub, orange blossom soap, and Eden's playful kicks that splashed water onto her father's face. Leonard laughed like a boy surprised by summer rain. At night, when Eden fussed, Camille sat against the headboard, rocking and humming the lullaby her grandmother once sang. Leonard sat beside her, reading aloud, sometimes from A Year by the Sea, sometimes from the breakfast menu just to calm himself. Waffles, strawberries, syrup, and one father who definitely won't sleep tonight, he whispered. Camille chuckled, resting her forehead on his shoulder. All their exhaustion suddenly took on form and warmth, measurable by the size of a palm pressed to another's back. Every little milestone became a celebration. The first time Eden gripped Leonard's shirt, the first laugh that bubbled when Camille blew soap bubbles, the first night she slept 3 hours straight, and the 2 adults embraced like negotiators of a peace treaty. On the living room wall hung a timeline made of photos. Eden in a knitted seal hat, Eden asleep on her father's chest, Eden frowning at her first taste of lemon. Each frame marked another step they had walked together on soft feet. Winter passed, with firelight, ginger cookies, and the scent of nutmeg in their hair. Spring arrived with the garden blooming and afternoons teaching Eden the names of leaves. By summer she was crawling, then standing, her gray eyes shining at the sight of waves. They held their wedding that early summer evening, on the same beach near the cliff where Leonard had once sat alone for years, back when Montauk was a map of loss. The guest list was short. Close friends, Dr. Meyer, Thomas, Mrs. Rossi, and Marcus, Camille's brother, holding baby Eden. The wind was light, the sea as smooth as glass, the horizon so clear it seemed to cut thought in half. Camille wore a simple white dress. The hem brushed the sand, and no one cared to dust it off. Around her neck gleamed the Montauk sand pendant, tiny as a caught star. Leonard wore a sand-colored suit, no tie, shirt unbuttoned at the collar. For the first time, he looked younger, not because he was hiding age, but because he had finally set something down. They stood beneath an arch of lavender, white daisies, and dried seagrass. Dr. Meyer officiated, her voice warm as freshly poured tea. I heard their child's heartbeat before I ever heard their vows, she began. The crowd laughed softly. Someone wiped a tear. Leonard's gaze held the depth of the sea. Once, he said, I tried to control everything. Time, work, even the borders of pain. I thought if I froze long enough, the past would be quiet. Then you came, bringing the smell of cinnamon, the sound of laughter, and the heartbeat of our child. He paused, swallowing emotion. I once froze the best part of me. You melted it. Camille took his hand. I didn't come to win a war against the past, she whispered. I came to live with it, like the sea lives with the rocks, accepting both the caress and the erosion. I can't promise I'll always be strong, but I promise to cook the first meal of hope every time you forget what hope tastes like. A light wind stirred, brushing her dress, her hair, making the sand pendant glimmer. Eden laughed in Marcus's arms, a sound so pure that Mrs. Rossi discreetly dabbed her eyes. I have something, Leonard said, pulling a thin box from his pocket. Inside were two pale gold rings, engraved on the inside, from mist to tide. He slid one onto her finger, and she slid his on in return. In that moment, the sea seemed to step one pace closer. When Dr. Meyer pronounced them husband and wife, applause rose, and somewhere a seagull cried, long and flute-like. Leonard kissed Camille, a kiss without the taste of tears, only salt and sunlight. Behind them, Montauk stood silent. The cliffs that once witnessed loss now witnessed promise. Here, Leonard murmured just for her, is where I found everything again. Not because the beach changed, but because I'm no longer standing alone. The reception was simple. Grilled oysters with garlic butter, olive oil bread, tomato salad with their own basil, and cream puffs Camille had baked that morning. Leonard swayed with Eden in his arms to the guitar of an old musician, whispering to his daughter, Do you hear that? That's your mother's laugh. You'll know that sound even with your eyes closed. Eden babbled back, a sound everyone decided meant yes. The sun sank. The beach turned rose gold. The sea poured like wine into the world's bowl. When string lights flickered around the floral arch, Camille leaned on Leonard's shoulder. Tomorrow, she said, I'll make lemon shrimp pasta. And I, he answered, will try not to spill the milk. They laughed, the lines around their eyes curving like parentheses, enclosing a brand new story. That night, after putting Eden to sleep, they stood together by her crib for a long time. Camille touched the sand pendant on her neck. It was warm from a day on her skin. It's strange, she whispered, how one grain of sand can hold an entire year. Leonard wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. It's not the sand that holds, he said softly. It's us. Outside, the sea breathed evenly. Inside, the clock ticked in rhythm. Between those two pulses, a third heartbeat, small, steady, kept growing. 1 year had passed and love now had a shape. The smell of cinnamon, the sound of laughter, sea-gray eyes, a ring engraved with a short verse, a grain of sand resting on her skin, clumsy but perfect meals, and two people who learned to stay. Not because of a contract, but because their hearts had already chosen. Another year had passed along Montauk's salt-streaked coast, where the wind always carried just enough brine to keep old memories preserved, but never bitter. This small town had its own rhythm of endurance, the waves repeating themselves endlessly, the gulls circling the same invisible path, and the people who came here to learn how to slow down. They said Montauk had only two real seasons, the season of the sea and the season of the kitchen. The sea belonged to daylight, the kitchen to the hour when the sun softened. Camille chose both. She opened a new chapter of her life on the street nearest the shore, where mornings began with the clink of cups and afternoons with the sight of a man sitting by a walnut piano, playing melodies as tender as foam. The cafe was called the Warm Spoon. The name sounded like an embrace. On the wooden sign outside, carved by hand, were the words, "Open when the kitchen is warm." Inside, honey-colored light poured through the windows, spilling over round tables. On the walls hung framed photos, Eden laughing in a tiny apron, Leonard solemnly dusting powdered sugar over cream puffs, a ritual he still hadn't perfected, though he never stopped trying. Camille wanted this place to tell their story, not through words but through scent. Mornings smelled of cinnamon and brown butter, noon of thyme, lemon, and crushed garlic, afternoons of bittersweet chocolate tangled with almonds. Guests who entered heard the gentle clink of spoons against pots, the rustle of baking paper, and sometimes the laughter of Eden from the backyard, where lavender bushes made a soft purple fence. The chalkboard schedule read 7:30 to 11 o'clock, breakfast. 12 to 14, light lunch. 15:30 till close, music and pastry. Next to that last line, Camille had drawn a tiny heart, piano by LV. No one needed to ask who that was. Every afternoon, as sunlight stretched long and gold through the windows, Leonard arrived with the precision of a tide. He pushed open the door, bell ringing, and even strangers felt like they'd just been greeted. He hung his coat, washed his hands, kissed Camille on the forehead, a habit so natural it seemed invisible, then sat at the piano. He'd strike a simple G chord to measure the day's humidity. If the note came out low, it meant the sea carried more mist. If bright, the air was dry and light. Camille tied her hair up, fastening it with the silver spoon hairpin he'd given her as a wedding gift, and began her own rhythm in the kitchen, stirring lemon butter sauce for shrimp pasta with one hand, setting out milk bread rolls with the other. The smell would rise, and Leonard would glance over his shoulder, smiling. He never said, "It smells good." He always asked, "What flavor is hope today?" And Camille always replied, "The flavor of a smile." The cafe taught them a gentle habit to stay with each other, with the kitchen, with the music, with the seasons, with strangers who came seeking a pocketful of tenderness to take home. There was the elderly couple who came every Tuesday for milk pudding, and La Vie en Rose played in Montauk tempo. The schoolgirl who dropped by for a ginger cookie to fight boredom. The woman by the window whose eyes softened after Leonard played Claire de Lune slower than usual. Sometimes Leonard switched to a melody they had written together, one no one else knew the name of, its rhythm like a spoon-stirring batter, patient, unhurried, without effort. When asked, he smiled. It's called The Warm Spoon. At night, Eden refused to sleep until her father played the Warm Spoon song. Eden, whose eyes were the color of her father's sea, now ran faster than the wind on the sand. She learned to count with seashells, to spell with leaf names, basil, thyme, mint, lavender. Some days she was dusted in flour from helping her mother roll dough. Others she lay on the porch staring at clouds. "Do clouds have a smell?" she once asked. Camille said, "Milk." Leonard said, "New paper." Eden decided they both were right, as long as they meet in the middle. One evening, as the cafe thinned out and the sky pooled orange on the horizon, Eden ran in from the garden, hair damp with sweat, clutching a handful of lavender. She offered it to her mother. "Cook this smell," Camille laughed. "This smells for cooking the wind." She turned to Leonard. "Play for the wind." He shifted chords, pulling a line of notes slightly salty, slightly cool, like a window opening toward the east. Exactly 2 years after they'd signed the contract that neither expected to lead to a wedding, Camille decided to close the cafe early, for one day only, to open another kind of door. They invited family and friends to the same beach by the old cliffs. Thomas brought a portable grill. Mrs. Rossi came with a giant picnic basket of lasagna and cream puffs, perfect this time by Camille's precise standards. Marcus carried a ukulele. Dr. Meyer brought a chilled bottle of white wine and a bucket of ice. The sky was glass clear, the sea as blue as Eden's eyes. The little girl wore a short white dress and was barefoot, zigzagging through lavender sprigs along the dunes. Their scent rose purple into the gold sunlight. Leonard sat on the wooden step, a small electric piano balanced on his knees, playing the first chord they'd ever written to calm each other back when belief still trembled. Camille spread a cloth, set out ceramic plates, and poured mint lemonade. It was so simple there was nothing to boast about, and for that it was perfect. "Do you remember the first day?" Camille asked, adjusting the Montauk sand pendant at her neck. "I do." Leonard smiled. "I thought I was looking for a frozen future." He paused as if afraid to break the fragile air. But it turns out, the future smells like fresh bread. Camille leaned her head on his shoulder. And sounds like music. And laughter, he added. Eden tugged them down to the wet shoreline, where the tide had left behind footprints and ribbons of light trapped in shallow water. She ran, fell, rose again, laughing like the world had just invented joy. Camille and Leonard stood together, silent, letting the quiet frame the moment. "Do you still want to go anywhere?" he asked, eyes on their daughter. "Yes," Camille said, "to tomorrow." "Then let's go," he answered. They didn't know how many times the world would change colors, only that right now it was perfect. Blue of sea, purple of lavender, gold of sun, white of sand, and the transparent warmth of the tiny grain of Montauk sand resting against her skin. Never cold, always alive. That night, the warm spoon stayed lit later than usual. Camille washed the last bowl and turned it upside down on the rack. Leonard locked the door and hung the wooden sign, "Tomorrow the kitchen will be warm again." Eden slept on Marcus's shoulder, still clutching her stuffed seal. Mrs. Rossi tidied quietly like a breeze. Dr. Meyer took her last sip of wine and smiled the way only someone who had seen enough miracles can. Knowing the real ones always wear ordinary clothes. When everyone had gone, Leonard pulled a chair closer to the piano and played a few soft bars, a tune meant only for this night. Camille leaned on the counter watching him. No words were needed. Behind the bar hung 3 framed photos. The first ultrasound, their wedding beneath the lavender arch, and Eden running through sunlight. 3 chapters of a story that needed no narrator. Camille switched off the lights one by one, leaving only the string of bulbs by the window. Their glow fell over the table, the piano, and Leonard's hands. Hands that once trembled from fear of loss, now trembling from fullness. She walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let's go home," she said. "Which home?" he teased. "The one that smells of cinnamon." They walked hand in hand through the sleeping street. The sea sighed in rhythm, the sky exhaled deeply. Before turning onto the path toward their villa, Leonard stopped and pulled her close. His voice was low, the last note held intentionally long. "I once froze my faith in a test tube. Then you came, lit it with a smile and the scent of baked bread, and so my heart thawed forever." Camille didn't answer with words. She laid her hand over his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath, then pressed her forehead to his. Far away, Eden stirred in her sleep, murmuring a sound that belonged only to her. Nearby, Montauk seemed to pause, as if smiling like an old friend. The end of the contract bore no seal, only the scent of brown butter and the echo of a piano fading into the night. And the beginning of life turned out to need nothing more than this. A small cafe called the Warm Spoon, a piano kept free of dust, in a courtyard where a child with sea-colored eyes runs through sun, surf, and lavender. Everything that cannot be frozen, everything that is warm, everything that stays,